Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I'm Brian Calley, CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan.
And I'm Kelli Saunders, Vice President of Policy and Engagement here at SBAM, filling in for Sarah Miller this week. So, Brian, we talked about it being a big day on Monday because it was your birthday, but then we kind of had an exciting Tuesday that made the week even bigger. We filed a federal lawsuit against the U.S. Department of Treasury. Can you talk about why we have taken this action and what it means?
Yeah, it's a big step for SBAM and standing up for our members. We do so in a lot of different ways. Sometimes that means in the legislature or in Congress, rulemaking in the departments within the bureaucracy. But it also means sometimes going to court. And in this case, that's what we're doing, filing a lawsuit in federal court, Michigan's Western District of the federal court system. And why the Western District? Because SBAM, our headquarters, is in Lansing, which is in the Western District. And it is challenging the constitutionality of the Corporate Transparency Act. And if you don't know what this is yet, please check out sbam.org and look this up. Most small businesses in America are now subject to a reporting requirement, sensitive personal information on what the law calls beneficial owners must be reported to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, a division of the U.S. Treasury Department. And that requirement goes for literally tens of millions of small businesses across the nation. And our concern with this is many different levels. But I want to just illustrate that this is something that if you haven't heard about it, if you don't know about it yet, I would implore you, please look into it because it comes with very stiff criminal penalties for noncompliance. And we are very concerned that many small businesses are completely unaware that this even exists and could be at risk of violating it unintentionally. And so please check out sbam.org. But essentially, it's a reporting requirement. It says anybody who the law calls a beneficial owner. Now, true to form with the federal government, beneficial owner does not actually require that you have any ownership whatsoever in the business. You could be a beneficial owner even if you have no ownership interest. You would have to report, or you do have to report to the federal government under this Corporate Transparency Act. Anybody who is an owner of the company, certain officer positions in the company, but then it is this catch-all, anybody with substantial control. You might ask, how do you define a substantial control? Good question. It's one of the things that we're most concerned about is the vagueness of this law. In fact, we believe it's unconstitutionally vague. And so people could really find themselves on the wrong side of it. Heavy financial penalties and a 2-year felony for violating. So this is something that is very serious. You need to take a look at. So SBAM is challenging this law in federal court. He filed a lawsuit in federal court. Ours is not the first in the nation. There's another lawsuit that was filed in federal court in Alabama by the National Small Business Association. That court, that local district court, found the law to be unconstitutional, and it's kind of fast-tracked for the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. We do not want all of our eggs in one basket. Everybody, while this case is playing out in Alabama, or now in the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, anybody who's not a named plaintiff in that case still has to comply, including our members. And so we are seeking to get a preliminary injunction and then over the long term to have this law struck down as being unconstitutional for everybody. But a preliminary injunction that would say over the course of the next month, several months, as this court case is playing out, that people do not have to comply with this law. So we filed in the district court. So let me just go over the main reasons why we believe it's unconstitutional. There are 3 kind of main points that we're making. The first is that we believe that requiring that sensitive personal information, things like your driver's license number, passport number, the address, the individuals who are beneficial owners, which remember includes people who are not owners of the company, have to be reported to law enforcement, the Financial crimes enforcement network called FinCEN in the US Department of Treasury. You have to report all of this to law enforcement even though you're not suspected of doing anything wrong. There's no probable cause for it. So we believe it is a Fourth Amendment violation. This is the one that protects you from search and seizure. We also believe that that Congress did not have the constitutional authority to pass this law in the first place. There is no enumerated power that the federal government has to collect this information. Federal government says, oh, but we've got the Commerce Clause. And the Commerce Clause, interpreted very broadly, says we can pretty much do anything we want because everything's interstate commerce. And but the reason that we believe very strongly that we have this law should be struck down based on an enumerated powers claim is because the law requires that you report simply because you filed a new business. It's the act of creating an LLC or an S corporation, just filing a new business with your corporate department within the state. Just by filing a new business, you have to report. It doesn't require any commerce has happened whatsoever. So the fact that the filing is required before any commerce is conducted, we believe means that they had no enumerated power that they could point to justify the passage of this law. And finally, we think that based on the Fifth Amendment, and this is the one where you hear people say, like, I plead the Fifth, like that's part of the Fifth Amendment, but we're actually claiming it based on the our belief that it's unconstitutionally vague. When you have criminal penalties on something, as this does, a 2-year felony for not complying, that the law must be clear according to the Fifth Amendment. And in this case, it's just not. Where does substantial control begin and end? It is just not clear. And if you were to go to the FinCEN website and read all the guidance on this set of laws, it's so dense and so difficult to understand. 47 pages of explanation around the requirements of this law. We believe that it's a violation of the Fifth Amendment as well. So 3 different constitutional claims that we are arguing in Michigan's, the Western District of Michigan's federal court. Now, we do have some co-plaintiffs on this, a few members who have to report, but we are filing on behalf of all of our members. We're asking for this to be struck down based on all of our members. And we hope that the court will strike it down for all small businesses, regardless of whether they're members or not. Also, the Calley American Chamber of Commerce is joined as co-plaintiffs with us as well. So really big week, just in the very beginning of the process, and but we are determined to see this through.
So Brian, that's a great overview. And again, we really want to encourage you to visit our website. If you go to SBAM.org, there's a banner at the top. It explains the 3 constitutional things that we're calling into question that you can have on hand available to you. Please make sure that you use that as a resource. So with that overview, though, what can we really expect from here? What's the timelines on the courts and what we should expect to hear?
There's a couple of different timelines here. So there's our case, and then there's one in the 11th Court of Appeals down south, the 11th District or Circuit Court of Appeals. That case is a little bit ahead of ours. So the district court already ruled. It's at the Court of Appeals. We do plan to file an amicus brief supporting the National Small Business Association's position in that appellate court case. With ours, which is now filed, there's a couple of different timelines. First, we're looking for a preliminary injunction. We want for the judge to say that that nobody, until this case is resolved, nobody has to comply with it. If we win that, of course, we'll definitely consider that a great short-term victory. But really, the purpose of it is what happens after that, and that is we're hoping that the law itself is struck down as unconstitutional here, and then regardless if we win or lose, there's a very high probability this goes to the 6th Circuit Court of Appeals. and it really improves our chances that we'll get a favorable decision, and also the chances are if multiple different appeals courts are taking it up, improves the chances that it could make it to the Supreme Court to finally get struck down. And that's ultimately what we want to have happen here. It could happen in a different suit. It could happen with our suit. It could happen if any of these make it to the Supreme Court, but that's really our goal here. We want this law to be struck down as unconstitutional, but it will take a number of months for it to play out. And as it does, though, we will be committed to keeping you up to date. And would also invite you to just regularly check in at SBAM.org. You'll see what's happening there. So right now we've just filed. We've laid out the case that we're trying to make in order to get it struck down. We have also got some resources on there that tell you, what is the Corporate Transparency Act in the first place. Definitely something you want to pay close attention to, because even though we believe it's unconstitutional, there are very, very heavy penalties for non-compliance. So we do urge people to comply until or unless the courts strike it down, and that won't happen overnight. But again, a preliminary injunction will give us a little breathing room in the meantime.
All right, well, we really wanted to give a complete overview of what's been happening here. We will continue to keep you updated, but we'll pivot to some other items of the day. Brian, the Mackinac Center and some co-plaintiffs are going to the Supreme Court. Guess we'll stay in the court lane, if you will, regarding the Michigan income tax rollback that we've discussed numerous times here. We obviously were very disappointed in this recent decision to essentially bump it back up to 4.25. So can you give us an update on what's going on there?
Yeah, the appeal now is being made to the Supreme Court. So last time we talked about this is when the Michigan Court of Appeals sided with the state Treasury Department in the state of Michigan in saying that the last year's income tax rollback, that it was temporary, not permanent. And they did have to do some what I consider to be legal gymnastics to come to that conclusion. Essentially, as they do the formula, they had to consider that the word current rate, that when that law was made, that they're saying that current actually meant previous. That current doesn't mean current means previous. It's really I don't think it's a very sound decision, but it is what it is. And so now it's being challenged in the Supreme Court. I really don't expect the Supreme Court in its current makeup is going to disagree with the Court of Appeals. And so while I think it's a noble effort to still ask the question, push the question to the Supreme Court, my guess is that they will not take up the case, that they will indicate that the Court of Appeal that they see no reason to question the Court of Appeals decision. So I hope I'm wrong on that, by the way. I'm usually, but I hope that I'm wrong about that. The Supreme Court does take it up and air this, because I think it is an important it's an important question on how much interpretive power the bureaucracy has. And in this case, there's a formula that says, hey, if state revenues shoot up, if general fund revenues shoot up way past inflation, then the state needs to roll back the income tax rate. And then, so the question is, when it rolls back like it did last year from 4.25 to 4.05, is that permanent or not? And it really, I mean, if you just a plain reading, just like a regular person reads it, like you'd say, yeah, of course it is. But there's a certain level of, let's say, presumption that the government side of the decision has. So in this case, the people that are in power now said, no, we think it's previous for this, or we think that it's temporary for these reasons. And so the court seemed to take the approach of saying that, is there any way we could back this decision? Is there any way that, is there any credibility at all to it? And of course, there's almost always some way that you can, laws are complicated, how they're drafted, and you can read them different ways. Um, so in this case, the government side usually does have the presumption, that's what you have to overcome if you're challenging the government. It's the same thing that we face when it comes to the action that we're taking in the Corporate Transparency Act, that there's like a presumption that something that Congress passed and the position the government taking, the presumption is that it's constitutional. We have to overcome that presumption. In this case, it's like the government decided, hey, the income tax cut was temporary, and kind of the prevailing called attitude or way is that the presumption is that they're right. You have to overcome that presumption. And in this case, I think it's just given the makeup of the court right now, I'll be very surprised.
Well, thank you for the update, and we will hope you are wrong on this one. And I'm sure, obviously, our membership will hope that too. But we'll steer away from the court action of life right at this moment and get back to actually a story we brought up on Monday. Stellantis had made some announcements about layoffs, given that there was not a demand in the market for electric vehicles. And so basically the day the day after we had the briefing, Ford made an announcement. Can you talk about the details of that story?
Yeah, and I think that really what Stellantis did with a lot of their white collar, like 400 positions that were eliminated at Stellantis Michigan headquarters, the and then what Ford is doing now are an illustration of why, like, the economic gardening approach is a safer way to go when it comes to economic development, because small businesses are in every different industry, in every different community, in all different shapes and sizes. Like, it's just um, small businesses provide a certain level of resiliency to the economy because you don't have all your eggs in one basket. So what's happening now with Ford in their Rouge plant, so the storied historic Rouge plant that makes the F-150 Lightning, the electric F-150s, they have 2,100 people that work there, 2,100 people, and 700 per shift. And 2/3 of those jobs are going away because even though there's been some increase in demand in electric vehicles, not enough to justify the production capacity that they have there. And so now some of those workers, so the 1,400 workers, 2/3 of those jobs at that plant are being eliminated. They're going to the 1/3, about 700 of those employees are going to go to the Michigan Assembly Plant in Wayne County. So the Michigan Assembly Plant is where the Bronco and the Ranger are manufactured, and so it's really there. So about 1/3 of the jobs are they're gone, and then about 1/3 of them are going, and they'll make combustible engine gas vehicles, and then 1/3 of them are going to continue making battery vehicles. So as we consider, like, what is this? I mean, all this effort and focus and excitement and investment in battery manufacturing is like there's just a certain amount of risk that comes by just having all your eggs in that basket. And it's one of the reasons why I think creating an environment of success around small business owners is so important, because the automotive industry is an important part of Michigan's past, certainly an important part of our presence, and I expect it will be of our future. But we really can't afford to just be about that one industry. And to the extent that we are heavily invested in that industry, I think we're learning now that we can't get ahead of the market. We can't just decide we're going to be an electric vehicle society ahead of consumer demand or consumer acceptance of that technology. So I think there's some kind of economic lessons that are being learned. But at the end of the day, I think one of the important ones, and one that I want to make sure doesn't get left unsaid, is that the bread and butter of our economy is still small businesses, still entrepreneurs that are making jobs, making business, creating opportunity for other people, just with the ideas that they have that range every single industry, including the automotive industry, but across every industry and every community.
Yeah, it's a great point, and we'll continue to watch the ebbs and flows of this. But I think it speaks to a lot of what we've been talking about in the, late last year, beginning of this year, about our energy policy in general, that our small business owners make our policy, and they have continually said a diversification of the portfolio is incredibly important, and that is just as applicable here. And so, um, it's unfortunate to see these stories come out, but it's also kind of an "I told you so" moment. And so we want to thank our membership for engaging in these policy discussions too, because we continue to beat the drum. And when real news starts to come out and shows us this, it just proves that you're right. So, um, pivoting to another story that we have talked about in depth here, the redistricting commission. We've talked about the debacle of how the maps were not correctly drawn, and how they had to have essentially, a principal come in, a special master, if you will, to redraw the maps and make sure that they were fair. And so the new maps were sent to court this past week, and there was a decision. So can you talk a little bit more about what is next there?
Yeah, in the more immediate future, and we last time we talked about this, I thought they would probably decide pretty quickly. So new maps were drawn by the redistricting commission, the court for the House of Representatives. The court has accepted those new maps. There were some additional challenges that the original plaintiffs in Detroit still essentially charged the redistricting commission, saying, hey, look, you drew maps, you fixed some problems, but really you clearly protected incumbents when you drew those maps, and that's not a criteria you should have considered. But what the court kind of more narrowly looked at and said, that's not really their issue. Their issue was, did they fix the racial gerrymandering that had occurred with the redistricting commission's original maps? And the answer was yes, according to the courts. So they did accept these House maps. That was important because coming up in a little more than a month, filing deadline for people who want to run for state representative. They got to know like what you file for depends on how those lines are drawn. So this was important that they take it up quickly. They did take it up quickly and have accepted those maps. But there is the other half of this process. It was kind of a shocker that the redistricting commission, they came back together. Their previous maps were thrown out because of the House and the Senate maps were thrown out because of racial gerrymandering. So they was like, all right, we got to go back to the drawing board. They're still getting paid about $40,000 a year to serve on this commission, but they voted themselves a really about a 40% raise, and that I think that really kind of shocked a lot of people. It's like, you probably should have taken a pay cut because you did such a poor job at the beginning. Racial gerrymandering is what a horrible charge, and one that courts found happened, and so their response was like, all right, we got to draw them again, but we're going to give ourselves a big raise in pay to do so. So that was one of their kind of orders of business since we last spoke. And then, but the next big thing on the list is they got to redraw the Senate maps. So the court had originally said that the House and the Senate maps in Southeast Michigan were racially gerrymandered, and therefore were illegal. Well, the court stopped short of saying that you have to have draw new maps and have special elections in the Senate. They did not require that. So, but they are still requiring that the Senate maps get redrawn for when the Senate is next on the ballot, and that's 2 years from now. So, um, the next thing up and they'll have a little more time to do it, because this, again, Senate is only up every 4 years, not every 2 years. And the state Senate is for every 4 years. And all 38 Senate seats are on the same year. So, and they're the one that matches up with the gubernatorial election year. So that's the next order of business. They got to redraw the Senate, the Southeast Michigan Senate district maps. And I think that one potentially could have a balance of powers issue more so than the House map. The House maps, if you recall, I didn't think it would have a big impact, maybe a little bit of more of an advantage toward Republicans, but not much. I think it really, really, generally the partisan, split, which is pretty even between Republicans and Democrats, probably not a big impact on these House maps. But in the Senate, it's a little different. I think in the Senate, the way that they drew the maps were clearly to try to give more of an edge to Democrats. If they change them, it will remove that edge and make it more of a what would look like a 50-50 shot between Republicans and Democrats holding a majority, as opposed to now, which would be kind of a lean left type of a map. So that's what's up next. They're going to draw Senate maps. I don't think it will happen as fast as the House maps because they just have more time. And they get paid more now, so maybe they'll take a little more time.
As I say, so the next time I do a really bad job on a project, I'm going to ask you for a raise. I'm sure that's going to go really well. Anyway, our last story of the day, I know is really important actually to you and I in our previous work. Detroit got quite a lift this week. About a decade ago, Detroit entered into bankruptcy, but they had good news this week. So let's hear it.
Yeah, that's right. They actually got a credit rating increase, and this came from Moody's or a few different rating agencies. And this is a message to the market, those who would lend money to the city of Detroit. What are the chances that you're going to get paid back? And of course, you file bankruptcy, you're not going to maintain a good bond rating. And so their investment grade rating was, of course, stripped away. And Detroit has been kind of generally gaining strength since then. They had a great comeback, emergence from bankruptcy, and now Moody's has given them the kind of the lowest rung of investment grade bond ratings, which is going to make it so that the city of Detroit can use financing instruments at a more efficient level, or to be able to do so with lower rates, because look, at least this one rating agency has looked at the city and said they're no longer as risky a proposition as they were before. So really good news. That's of course, as Detroit is our largest city, and Michigan has a lot to say for what how healthy the state is as a whole, and just another sign that the work that started 10 years ago with the very difficult process of bankruptcy and the successful grand bargain that helped the city to emerge from bankruptcy and to start getting its future on a different, more positive path. Here we are 10 years later. I wouldn't have expected that investment grade bond rating would return as quickly as it did. Very, very good sign.
Yes, very happy for the city of Detroit, its residents, its small business owners, and what this means for the future. So ending our show on a very positive note today. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everybody.